Hi there, I am Cornelia Banks from the Galveston Island African American Treasures Group, and we are going to talk to uh, a member of our group, David Dumas, who is a historian in his own right. And today, David is going to give us information about one of our uh, religious areas in Galveston. David, will you tell us about Holy Rosary Catholic Church, or the Catholics denomination in Galveston?
Okay, let me just kind of start off first a little bit about Galveston. Galveston was the largest slave market west of New Orleans. Now, in Galveston, the slave population was a little less than 1,200 people and two free blacks. That was a little bit, around 16% of the population. Following the Civil War, but let me just backtrack a little. In 1840, the first slave was baptized in Galveston. In 1846, there was a slave marriage performed by the Catholic Church at the cathedral. Now, the state of Texas didn't recognize it, but evidently the Catholic Church did. Now, going back to after 1860, or after the Civil War, in 1886, the Bishop of Galveston, Bishop Gallagher, along with the Dominican sisters, decided to open up an elementary school for blacks here in the city, much to the chagrin of some of the local population. They had 13 students at that time. 2 years later, in 1888, the student population really grew, so they had to come up with another building on 25th and I, right at the location of City Hall today. In 1889, and they go back in 1888 as well, Bishop Gallagher decided that the blacks needed a parish of their own. So they started holding services in the school. And they also had visiting priests that also performed the service. In 1889, Father Gallagher was assigned to be the parish resident priest. And 2 years later, Father Keller built the first black Catholic church in the city of Galveston. In 1898, there was a new order that moved in. They built a new convent, and the Sisters of the Holy Family moved in, which is a black order. 2 years later, a hurricane came and struck Galveston, and it just wreaked havoc on the city, destroyed many of the buildings on the island.
Which one was that? Which hurricane?
1900. It's normally referred to in Galveston as the storm, or simply the 1900 storm. If you were BOI, born on the island, you never referred to it as a hurricane. It was just simply the storm, or the 1900 storm. Okay, following this, Father Keller went on a fundraising mission to get enough funds to rebuild the school and the church. And in the following year, the school was open, but the student population had kind of declined from what it was before the 1900 storm. In 1913, Father Keller resigned, and a new order came in. The Josephite Fathers came in and took responsibilities for the parish. Next year, Bishop Gallagher sold the land on 25th and I to the city of Galveston, but they also built up a new church and school over on 31st and Avenue N. In 1927, Holy Rosary decided to build a high school. Unfortunately, the high school just stayed around for 14 years due to financial difficulties. By the time 1958 came, Holy Rosary had a new church, school, convent, and rectory. And the population of the school classes really increased to a maximum of about 300 students. Again, in the early 1970s, the student population started to decline, and Holy Rosary finally shut down in 1979. In 2008, Hurricane Ike came to the island and caused extensive damage to all the structures, flooded each one of them out. The diocese looked at the financial responsibility for restoring all this and decided they could only restore the church. And what they did was combine all the parishes on the island into the Holy Family Parish. Holy Rosary has always been a beacon for black Catholics on the island. It was spiritual, educational wise, and social for all the black Catholics. As far as the school is concerned, we had several non-Catholic students that attended school with me. The nuns that taught us, most of them were very, very young, because I remember my kindergarten teacher, she was 19 years old when she taught me. But Holy Rosary has always been a beacon based not just for the Catholic community, but all of the black community on the island.
Well, would you say that Holy Rosary was the first African American in the state of Texas?
First church, it's some debate about which was the first parish, because I worked on the historical marker. And some of the people in Houston would always say that theirs was the first. So it's a little bit disagreement on where the first parish started, but Holy Rosary had the first black church.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Look, when you were talking about the area, the years, what did that have to do with during the time of slavery?
Oh, most of the slaves, like I said, Galveston slave market was the largest west of the Mississippi. But the slaves, once they were purchased, they were taken up to the mainland. Galveston never really had a plantation type environment. Most of the slaves in Galveston were servants. Mm-hmm. And if some guy wanted to show how wealthy he was, he had the best dressed servant. So a lot of the slaves in Galveston were very well dressed. But that was, from that standpoint, there were no plantations on the island. Just most of the slaves here were just house servants.
Wow. Did during the time that the Emancipation Proclamation was the Union Army came toward Galveston. Mm-hmm. Now, Granger, is that his name?
Yeah, Gordon Granger.
Okay, and so during that time, what was happening when the slaves thought that they were free?
Well, you got to understand something about the Emancipation Proclamation. When it was issued, it really didn't set anybody free at the time it was issued. And it only pertained to those slaves that were in part of the territory that was in rebellion against the United States. Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation as a War Powers Act. And for them, because slaves were the backbone of the Confederacy. I mean, they dug the trenches, harvested crops and everything. Once Lincoln did that, slaves started leaving. And it was good from a war power standpoint, but it was also good on the foreign policy aspect, because no European country was going to recognize a society where slavery was an integral part of that society. People want to know, well, what took them so long for the slaves? Well, you didn't have CNN News, NBC News, or none of this stuff. So the slaves didn't know, and the masters certainly weren't going to tell them they were free. And if they did, where would they go to? How would it be enforced? You can have a law or anything, but if you don't have anyone there to enforce it. And once the Union Army came in with Gordon Granger, now they had the means to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation.
David, let's go back to the church, where we were talking about the church. And so, do you have anything to show me that about the church?
Yes. Okay, here we have the layout. Over here is the rectory. In the center is the church, the convent, and the school is on the far end. Now, what is special about this church, this is where my parents got married and all of my relatives, in this church. And this is a picture of the same layout, the same plan, but here's a bunch of school kids out front. And this, after Hurricane Ike, as I mentioned earlier, this is all that's left. Now, the thing it is, the original structures were all facing Avenue N is this direction. And this is the church now. This is the only building that's left at the site. Before Hurricane Ike hit, there was a rectory and the church and what was left of the convent. But again, all those buildings were flooded. The diocese spent quite a bit of money onto restoring the church, and this is all that's left of the original plan.
So you know that on our tour, probably we could our tour guide could probably, if somebody wanted to see the actual site as well as the church, do you think they will be able to go into it?
Yes. If not, we can contact Steve Marsh, and Steve always has a key to the church. And so we can make preparations, in advance if we know they want to see this, go and talk to Steve.
Good. When you talked about the teachers who came at such an early, young age, and that was because they didn't have African American nuns.
The Sisters of the Holy Family
area
was a black order because the Sisters of the Holy Family taught me, and I really didn't realize how young they were because I was just 5 years old. And like I said, Sister Joseph Ann taught me in the kindergarten. I thought she was about 50, but come to find out, she was just about 18 years old when she taught me.
But do you know where they came from? I think I understood they came from the.
She was from
Caribbean.
Belize,
Okay.
from Central America.
Because
Now, I don't know if all the nuns were, but I know Sister Joseph Ann, she was from Belize.
What about the priests? Do we have any African American priests?
Father Jude, who's currently the pastor at Holy Rosary. Now, he's also a pastor at several other churches here in Galveston. I think he's from Africa.
And he's the current
Right,
priest.
correct. Up until then, all the priests have been white.
Were you an altar boy?
Yes. Yes, I was an altar boy.
And so, but as far as your experience at the school, going to Catholic school, how was that in Galveston? Was that were you in Catholic school from elementary to high school?
Well, Holy Rosary at the time, I was the only one to the 7th grade. And I just can't put enough emphasis on the impact the nuns had on my life. And some of my friends, who we still talk about it, had on all our lives. I mean, they were disciplinarians. We used to kind of hesitate on doing things. There's a lot of stuff we did. We were very mischievous, growing up. And we thought we were kind of slick at the time. But I knew they do what we were doing all the time.
But at that time, doing it with segregation, just the African American Catholic kids ended up going to public school unless they left the city of Galveston. Is that correct?
That's correct. There were two Catholic high schools. At the time, it was Curran, which is O'Connell now, and that was Ursuline, which was for girls. O'Connell was for boys. But eventually, Hurricane Carla just destroyed the Ursuline Academy. And eventually, they just combined, into one school. But if you were black, you would have to leave the island past the 7th grade.
And then you merged with the public
School kids.
And ended up at Central.
Right.
So basically, I guess what I'm asking is even though we had segregation, there was still the camaraderie where everyone was together and learning and moving forward
Yeah,
in Galveston when it came to African Americans finishing school
right,
and
correct.
moving forward.
Yeah, like I said, Holy Rosary gave me a very good foundation. I mean, that's why I really developed study habits, and I still love to read today. And that came out of Holy Rosary. I mean, I may not have realized it at the time, but once you get grown and you start looking back on things, this is where your foundation comes from and what you're going to do the rest of your life.
It just brought to mind that I think that probably in making persons who's listening to this to understand that there were two other public school elementary schools. One was Booker T. Washington Elementary, and the other was George Washington Carver.
Yeah, as a matter of
So
fact,
once students from all three of those areas ended up in the public schools together.
right. Matter of fact, I live right across the street from Carver. And a lot of my good friends went to school at Carver. And like I said, we used to all play on the playground. We were growing up. We played football, baseball, you name it. We were out there on that school ground. You know, on the way we left the school ground, if it was raining or it got too dark to see anything.
Historically, it just says to me that in Galveston, whether you were, Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, or Catholic, that it was the first in the state of Texas, each one of those denominations.
Correct. Galveston was the first in a lot of things. Like I said, from our stand, we had the first Catholic church school in Galveston, oldest newspaper in the state. I mean, you can just go on and on and on about the first. I mean, Galveston was established well before Houston was established.
Absolutely. So now that you hear about now that we are considered, well, not considered, it is true where it all began, the Juneteenth.
Right. I remember growing up, we didn't ever call it Juneteenth. We just called it the Teenth. That's what we referred it to. Somebody would come, people from Houston would come down and say, well, what are y'all going to do on the 10th? Well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it was always been a holiday for people here. I had no idea about people in other parts of the state, never heard about it. Growing up here, I just thought everybody automatically knew about it.
I have to tell you something funny about myself. I attended college in Los Angeles, and it was Juneteenth. And I kept waiting for people to have big celebrations. And I called home and said, I think all these people have lost their minds because they don't know what Juneteenth is about. And that was actually when I found out that it was a Texas holiday.
Yes.
So I had been all my life celebrating, but not equating it with just Texas.
And it originated right here in Galveston.
That's right. We're the authentic.
Yep.
When we have been talking about the different areas of history in Galveston, you sort of hit on the fact that there were a lot of firsts. Can you give me some of those firsts?
Well, like I mentioned, the newspaper and just about all the black churches, regardless of denominations, they were the first in the state of Texas. Because, again, Galveston was one of the oldest cities in the state. Only other city that was older was in Nacogdoches, up in East Texas. That's the only one that, to my knowledge, that was older. But again, going back to schools for blacks, Central High, was the first black high school in the state of Texas. I mean, that's probably a lot more. I just know that Galveston known for the first, but for me to go name everyone directly, I can't do that.
As we talk about the first in Galveston, I have a list here that we can talk about actually the first, some of the first denominations in the state of Texas, and they might not be the original building, but they're still in the area in which they began. Uh, we have, as you said, the Catholic Church, Holy Rosary Catholic Church. That building is still in the area in which it began.
Right.
Uh, Reedy Chapel, African Methodist Episcopal Church, is still in its area. It's over 170 something years old. We have the historic Baptist Church, Avenue L Baptist Church, which is the first Baptist church. We have the Episcopalian Church on the 44 area, 44th Street
On
area.
44th and, no, it's on 41st and M&S, the block
Right.
from my house.
Right. So it's still there and standing as African American. And but even though we have those first denominations, most of all of the churches that have been built after that are over hundreds of years old. They really are. So, I mean, as far as the denominations, we have just African American denominations. We just absolutely have the first in Galveston. And as I was saying to our tour guide, that in Galveston, even when you notice the neighborhoods, you know, usually we have people who come to Galveston and they will ask, which side of the tracks did you live on? And we didn't have on the side of the tracks. We might have been segregated, but our neighborhoods were, in our time, were absolutely integrated. And so you might have playmates who were different ethnicities,
Correct.
but you went to school differently or shopped differently, or, you know. And we did have many, many businesses that were African American owned. And of course, the integration sort of put them out of place. You know, I can remember when we would have to go to restaurants and we only went to the one that was, you know,
Gus Allen, Albert Feast.
yes, for people who actually were entrepreneurs who made it big, or because we were the ones who supported those places. David, is there anything else you want to tell us about?
Well, we just kind of mentioned the business aspect. I remember my father, he very good carpenter. He built rent houses. So we had 3 rent houses, and I never recall a white plumber coming to the house. They were all black. And I never went to a white dentist in my life. So you had, black businesses driving on 25th and Market. You had cleaners, but integration was a double-edged sword. It helped people out as a group, but as individuals, it kind of hurt.
You know, it really brings to mind that when I did not attend a historical black college, but I did what we call now PWUs, predominantly white university. And I realized at that time I knew no one of my age that was white. And that was a really awakening for me to actually know that I knew that whites exist. I played with those in the neighborhood. But as far as someone that I had immediate contact with, besides other little things that we had in the city for mixed groups, but not actually personally being somebody that I went to your house and spent the night and had a good time. That was really an opening for me, an eye-opener. Well, do you have anything else you want to say? We're glad that we have been able to express information about things that are happening on Galveston Island, as well as our own personal experiences.
Well, Galveston, it's a lot of history in Galveston. Uh, the Juneteenth is, is becoming a big event. But there are other things, like I kind of like stuff from the Civil War. I'm not really I'm an amateur historian that just it's not enough for me to read about history. I got to go walk the grounds to get a feel. And January the 1st, 1863, Battle of Galveston. And I just got to put a plug in for black sailors because I was in the United States Navy. People always talk about United States colored troops, but they also had United States colored sailors as well. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing this with us.
It's my pleasure.